Hello. Hi. What's up, friends? Happy full moon. Ulilisi kalinta. Kikanata. Nata sunoye ehi atsi kiska. Happy full moon, blood moon, total lunar eclipse. What an interesting thing upon us. There's very potent energy, but it is also very clear. And the placement of the moon is very interesting, let alone its oppositions, in the ways that we are reading it. For all of the fun, pretty TikToks that we've seen, or Instagram reels we've seen about it being at 3:33, for sure, yeah, but that is only in Pacific time. So, I think for the Midwest, it's like 5 to 5:30, something like that, but it starts at like, I want to say like 2 a.m. 1 a.m. It starts at 1 a.m. and essentially reaches its totality in the Eastern Hemisphere at like 6:30 ending. So perhaps is a night above any night to peer into the sky and not with fear in your sights or sensibilities. It is a very transformational moon. I mean, even the ways in which eclipses work is that light is cast, refracted off the moon at any time, but that because of Earth's placement, because of the moon's placement, that light is caught in shadow and refracted. It absorbs certain frequencies of light and then projects more blue or violet frequencies of light, which are potent colors, sacred colors, very much mercurial colors of understanding and of mastery and of expansion. Not just density, not just chaos in the mind, not just the blues as in sadness, but the blues as in a conjuring of new, a conjuring of how resourceful we can be. From my calculations, from my observations, in the ways that the moon will settle, it's rising in Leo, sure, but the actual date of it would be technically Virgo. So I think it enters in illusion and exits in a dispelling of truth. And rather than it be, all fire despite the red, it is very much beckoning an understanding, an analytical understanding, a cooling in reason and rhyme beyond reason, and the ways in which we find rhythm in that. So if this feels like it's kicking your ass, what is the rhyme? What is the rhythm? Who is it that enters with the moon, and who is it that will be spit out after the fact? Coming to understandings of truth are never so easy, but they can be very simple. It's our resistance to that really makes those things particularly difficult. The procrastination of, even, that prolongs time in places of discomfort and obfuscates or fogs up our capacity to see potentiality or possibility beyond. So I think that there's a lot to say of this moon in Leo specifically, and all of its oppositions. But we'll play with both. We'll play with both for sure. Because, you know, if you've got it set in your mind that the third is what we're rocking, then for sure we'll pull in Virgo energy as well. And both require each other. You know, if we are not careful with our Leo and thrust ourselves into this, then we miss those shorter frequencies of light. And that is where Virgo comes in, because it's able to notice these things, these subtle differences, these context clues, I suppose, because Virgo can be very studious. Both can be very stubborn. Both can be very set in right mind, you know, in myself as the right mind. Both can be very self-righteous rather than expansive in technology, expansive in mind, you know, mind technology, not the technology we're all being inundated with. And not just that, but the moon places in this wonderful little triangle between two retrograde planets, between Mercury's retrograde and between Jupiter's retrograde. So kind of like a spinning back of time as well. So it's very transportational, it's very transformational, it's very transmutational. So what is it that you bring to the altar? And what is it that will conspire? Not what you want, but what you need. Because too often do we come to these settings with only the offering of half-assed presence, expecting so much in return, and then blame spirit and source for not delivering the gifts we felt so owed to. And realistically, I think that will be a lesson in this too, is this power of the moon, and as it settles in this blood moon, in this eclipse, will bring us what we need, though that may not look like what you want. And thus, the truth that arises from the illusion that so many of us are fed, that we are all fed, that we may continue to spit out, not realizing what it is that we're actually putting into the system, will reveal more discomfort in truth. And, you know, often, I think more often than not, the collective is so fearful of truth because it disturbs comfort, because it disturbs the complacency and the comfort with what we have known, that questioning becomes a toppling of, and that is because the foundation was faltered to begin with. Even within this triangulation of the moon and Mercury and Jupiter, the Earth sits like a weight point at a specific side. It sits like a weight bearing point, and it's not a stable one. It's one that's very much teetered on the edge of something else, you know, radicalized perhaps in its placement, leaning or wading back into the past, or leaning so far into the future that it fails to recognize where it is, or that we fail to recognize where exactly it is and what this weight bearing point is, because the moon recognizes itself, let's be real. Not just that, but if you consider oppositions of Leo placements, then we have a lot of energy in Pisces, which is interesting. Fire and water, the ways in which those things can seem so combative, but are in fact tools toward new creation. The Sun, Mars, Mercury, Venus, Saturn, and Neptune are all very, very tightly knit in this placement. Granted, Saturn and Neptune are in a technically different sign, or on the cusp of, but they're, much like I've said before, they're begging us to remember what they taught us in Pisces before we ignite it in Aries. And so many people are arsons of their own emotional integrity and will burn themselves to the ground, or burn themselves out, or set fire with no plan of new. And that is something that I think, ultimately that Virgo energy also wants us to be aware of and analytical of, like risk assessment, really. You can be as wild as you want to be if you're aware of the responsible boundaries of. And this is where people's, mental health becomes an excuse to just be cruel and to trauma dump or to just generally be less than kind of attitudes or kind of people. The amount of times even I've experienced of people just utilizing it as an excuse to behave however they want. I think in religiosity, that's very much, these religions of forgiveness and atonement, these organized religions of forgiveness and atonement, is by design so that you could continue to be as ill willed as you please, because you don't have to be responsible to anybody else's interpretation of it or how you hurt anybody, because your God will forgive you if you just pay your church a little bit more money. Which is inherently problematic and creates fertile grounds for more ill will, and lack of responsibility or lack of self-reflection. One of the best things I learned about driving even was like from a race car driver, probably some of the best advice I've ever gotten for driving. Quite honestly, driving tests as they are is not ideal. No wonder there's so many accidents, quote unquote. When really it's just ignorance of the vehicle that you're operating, ignorance of the physics that it requires to be operated responsibly or reasonably. And that very much applies to this weight bearing point in Earth, and this triangulation of this Mercury and Jupiter energy as well. And ties to everything Venus, Mars, and Pluto are doing. But in driving, this race car driver was like, you can drive as fast as you want, but what needs to be on your mind, at the forefront of your mind, is not how fast you are going, that you finally got it to, 110 miles per hour in under 60 seconds or whatever. It has to be at the forefront of your mind. How long will it take me to stop? How much distance do I need to stop, and how much time do I need to stop? Then you can go as fast as you want. And that is because you're aware of your boundaries, you're aware of your surroundings, you're aware of its impact. If you're going 30 miles an hour, 110 miles an hour, how much distance do you need to stop? How good are your brakes or whatever? And how much time does that take? Are they very reactive? Will it respond right away? Or is it, worn brake pads that will need a few more seconds and therefore more length? I see all the time, even people on the highway, they don't think about that. They don't think about that at all. They're just thinking about where they are and where they need to be. And so everything else becomes in their way. And it's kind of like a justification of means to an end, which is very Machiavellian, which is very much about manipulation. And that's not to say that manipulation in is of itself problematic, but more often than not, that manipulation is not to manipulate prime circumstance or fertile ground, but it is to manipulate for our own benefit. And that is uneven, imbalanced on the scales of justice. Much like I think we're learning in general with our own body as its scales of justice or scales of balance within masculine and feminine energies, and Pluto being very much a uniter and a paradigm shifter. And we've spoken before about identity crisis that comes with that because of the ways in which they've been optimized and the ways in which they've been compartmentalized. So even if we consider the Virgo energies of the moon as it carries into its highest placement, then opposition is Aquarius and Pluto, which is asking us to consider how we balance these energies and whether or not they justify each other's behavior or whether or not they regulate each other's behavior. You know, how does your masculine burn yourself to the ground? How does your feminine exemplify the masculine and become patriarchy by a new name, uh, rather than illuminate the integral qualities of each? You know, masculinity that's able to hold space for femininity without fear, doesn't need to perform, and is also not threatened, which is ultimately prime masculinity. And femininity that feels heard, that feels like it has the space to be able to take up, is able to expand so much more so, because it is not alone in its fight. And often, especially in this world, we're convinced and conditioned to suppress feeling, emotion, desire, and to pontificate in so many ways, not realizing that it actually creates fertile ground for the same thing in which we aim to seek refuge from. So consider that in yourself, consider what you are projecting, and consider the ways in which it can optimize for a new reality. And again, with Saturn and Neptune, as it moves into new placements, this is new dreams, this is new visions, this is new wealth and relay of. And that's not to say wealth per se, but the many ways in which we can see the outlines of our growth defined, that we can see, you know, the possibilities of our growth more well illuminated and illustrated. And that completely struck me with, you know, years ago, I suppose, I would ask people, as like kind of a social experiment, if all of your needs were met, your fridge was stocked, your bills were paid, whatever, rent was paid, blah 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 blah, what would you be doing with your time? When the, you know, accumulation of these needs met is no longer attached to work, quote unquote, what would you be doing? Would you be painting? Would you be dancing? Would you be holding space? Would you be da 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 da? And I remember I asked somebody that, and their response to me was like something along the lines of like, well, I would find people like you and help them project their message or whatever. And it's like, that's still so colonial. Like, so you're seeking other people's powers to help you feel better about yourself, or like you're seeking other people's self self actualized opportunity to illuminate the kind of life that you're not even able to live on your own, that you're not even able to embody, but you love fetishizing, you love idolatry, or idolizing, you love worshipping, but not actually walking with in devotion. Like that's so colonizer shit. Doesn't resonate. Doesn't resonate. Um, and now I feel like the same question applies, but by a slightly different skew. And now the question that I ask is, if you lived in a successfully decolonized and stripped of patriarchy kind of world, what is it that you would be doing? If we were not weighed down by fighting to decalcify and strip back these concepts, what would we be doing with our time? Because so many people are just led by this rage, just led by this anger, not realizing that that self-righteousness and lack of emotional control and volatility still is absolutely the metric by which patriarchy and colonizer rhetoric and capitalism still thrives. Because we're able to pontificate and you know, show machismo and bravado in such a way, but not actually able to align in doing that which we say. This is a truth, a difficult truth that this moon will continue to peel back and reveal as it illuminates and as it sets. Um, and in that, I got to sit with that question absolutely and be like, well, what would I, you know, what would I still be doing if I no longer had to peel back these layers of colonization or of patriarchy, and I would still be holding space to remind us to breathe, to remind us that spirit is around us, that spirit is very alive, and that dogma is not thriving. And with that trust, no longer having to peel back the layers of mistrust that we've been indoctrinated into, we would be that much more efficient of dreamers. We would be that much more efficient in conjurers. And so I would still be holding this space in the ways in which I do. And that is, I think, 100% the ways in which we step into the kind of reality that we really aim for, that we step into the kind of world that we really want to live and thrive in. And it's no longer just a fantasy, and it's no longer just a far off, distant goal, but it is very much something that we're able to speak and live and walk in alignment and in integrity and in uprightness. That is the kind of evolution and revolutionary thought that Aries and Saturn and Neptune want us to be able to move with, rather than the doubt and the anger and the frustration and the annoyance and the misdirected desire, really. Big thoughts, big thoughts. Venus, Mars, and Pluto are very much an anchoring point. And the ways in which we're able to anchor into the self and into the many ideals and ideas of the self. With such a heavy blood moon and eclipse, are we anchoring into that which we are trying to escape from, and therefore causing the storm to follow? Or are we anchoring into and rooted to that which we aspire to, that which we embody, and how that will always walk with us and meet us eye to eye in a way that reflects directly, in a way that reflects the kind of light that we want to see. And so, even back to the moon, how is it that we interpret these waveforms of blue and purple light? And for many, the purple is, spiritual awareness and growth and gain. And that comes with a lot of self-righteousness rather than reflection, responsibility, accountability, or growth. But here we are to continue to peel back those layers so that we can see the many colors, the prisms of truth, for what they want to be, for what they need to be, and embrace that and walk with that, especially with oppositions of Aquarius or Pisces. The ways in which those energies will condense, will coagulate, will collaborate, and will facilitate in observation and in teaching that no longer requires dictation, where we no longer need that whispering in the ear because our listening to it is more able to wrap around those frequencies, more able to understand, more able to move with, more able to hear and discern. It's like a language barrier. It's 100% like a language barrier between what it is we expect or anticipate from this kind of energy and what it is this energy is actually gearing toward. And so we anchor away and accept transmutation into all that is to come. And we'll pull some cards to see what it is this blood moon and this eclipse will have to say. It is a total eclipse, though it will not be like fully visible to everybody. I think the most visible is in that 3:33 a.m. Pacific time zone. Which I don't know. That's interesting because technically that's like LA West Coast and stuff, and so much of that place strikes me as like a CIA psyop. Like if the government could have created this false place where everybody thought their dreams would come true, how much could they take advantage of our dreams and our goals? And that's what Hollywood is, ain't it? That's what LA has become. You know, so many of its horror stories are really just stories of the manipulation and abuse of sex workers, of marginalized peoples, of the unhoused. And that's not what we hear about. We hear about all of the dark, evil, sexy stories because that shit sells. And that's not wealth. That is exploitation. And that is the same exploitation that created the circumstances for where we find ourselves now with systems of power. And too many are replicating it, though they're desperately trying to convince the internet that they are not. And so, we pull some cards and we see what resonates for me and thee. And thank you for being here. For those that are present with me, thank you very much for your time, for your awareness, and for your company. I appreciate you, and I hope that this will offer you plenty of nuggets of wisdom to be able to ground and root and also sprout something entirely new. Because even blood moon, the blood is good for plants, is good for growth. And not through sacrifice from some external source, but through recognizing the power of the own blood, of our own blood. Too often do we shed the blood of others, consummating death and calling it life. I don't eat dead things, and I don't eat live things, because I honor life. All right, lovely. I think that's where it wants to be. I think that's where it wants to be. All right, loves. Much like we are hanging out, much like there are cards in between us, not only is this an opportunity to receive some information and expand your awareness, but it is also an invitation for a breath. 3 breaths to be specific, in which case you don't have to channel anything. That's my gig. But all I ask from you, all the moon asks from you, is to open your body to the fullest breath that you can find and to expand your awareness to notice any sensations that arise. Cool? Party on. Take a deep breath in. And exhale. Take a deep breath in. And exhale. Take a deep breath in. And exhale. Interesting. I'm much less visceral. As far as sight or sound, it's just very much like this hot ball of light that's like almost like I'm too close to the sun. Like I'm flying too so close to the sun, like I'm seeing it, I guess, for what it is too. Like I'm doused in light, but not like beautiful light, like hot light, like the brightest point of any flame, which will sear the fuck out of you. And also, as far as sensation goes, it feels kind of hollow. It feels kind of empty. And if you've read with me before, that's not something that I guess really happens often. Even when there's subtle sensations, there's something, and I feel like that is very literally the ways in which we've externalized so much of our stimulus. That the hottest points about us are often, the things that we do, or all of these things that we're attached to, but have very little to do with our spirit or ourself. I joke all the time that sometimes the affluent people who are like very modified, like that's just the most interesting thing about them, and that's fine. Whatever, you had the money to do it because your parents were around. I don't know. Whatever it is, some people just like really, 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 really want to be different, and they don't know why, or they don't know how. And also the ways in which so many are so seeking reason, seeking forgiveness, seeking God. And realistically, maybe God is just the word that we use to excuse ourselves from not being able to fully see ourselves, to fully recognize or actualize ourselves. And so we seek some external validation through somebody else's rhetoric, through somebody else's guidance, through somebody else's book. Even the ways in which people use AI for philosophy, like, how is a robot going to tell you how to think better when you don't even know how to think for yourself? That's yet again another externalized source of information that separates you from being able to rely on or trust the self. In so many ways, it's a misuse and a misdirection of energy. And it ends up being very hollow, it ends up being very empty, it ends up not being very fulfilling. And so that takes me back to, again, these new dreams, these new visions, and wealth and relay of is not, necessarily wealth as in like becoming the next one percenter, but the ways in which we're able to feel fulfilled through anything that we do, and through the work that we do, or through the ways in which we walk through the world. So many are expounding anti-system things, but still working for the system because they're afraid of what it would be like to exit it. And that is something that's increasingly unfulfilling. And then people wonder why they're depressed, why they're anxious, why they don't feel in alignment, why they feel like they're betraying themselves, or the ways in which the body will let you know that you are betraying yourself. And it is because we're still seeking fulfillment by somebody else's metric, even if we, again, pontificate or like puff our chest about it in one way, shape, or form to the public, but not to ourselves. There's a disunite in there. There's a big disunite in the ways in which we present information versus the ways in which we embody information. And ultimately, you don't have to shout so loud when you're already doing the dang thing. You don't have to explain so much when you're already doing the dang thing. You become a source of presence. You become a source of like signal or frequency rather than lost in the static. Which is interesting because that came up in a collective reading as well, in the ways in which we, project our frequency. And now there's also so many more instances of, not just that in a spiritual way, but ways to, develop your own frequency weapons to push back on the intense frequencies that are weighted upon us. Which, again, that weight-bearing point that is the earth, it is taking on all of this energy in a really intense and incredible way, and in a way that can be very uplifting and liberating, or can be very much chaos ensued, because that energy is also not, that weight-bearing point in us is not ready to hold that weight, because we're afraid of it, because we're avoiding it, because we're ignoring it in some way, shape, or form. This is also, I think, very much, and I've I've said this before, the ways in which, indigenous story and prophecy talks about the buffalo running into the storm rather than away. If the storm is coming this way, and or your demons or your fears or what have you, most often what people will do is run from it. In which case the storm still follows. But make like the buffalo, run into the storm, you'll pass it. You don't bypass it, but you do enter it and come out safer. Come out that much stronger. And there's nothing to avoid. Now the storm will do its own thing. And you have that much more time and peace and resonance and to enjoy what rain has fallen, to enjoy the rain's fall and what will rise after it. New growth, new sprouts, new softer ground that's just begging for you to run your fingers through it like you would Mother Nature's hair. Interesting. Oh me, oh my. Yes. Yes, yes, yes. In so many words, exactly that. Six of Spades, Nine of Spades, King of Hearts, inverted. That is very much the ways in which we betray ourselves, the ways in which we betray our heart, the ways in which our heart is not in alignment with mind. And this is, again, the relaying of information between Leo and Virgo, in which, analytic or passion, the ethos and the logos and the pathos, and we're finding our ethos, we're finding our ethics, but our logic says one thing and our passion says another. What are the ethics that bind these things? Too often do we sacrifice our ethics for complacency, for comfort, for one thing or another, and we're easily swayed in that way. Especially as we move into a new astrological season and understandings of Aries, like Aries is the son of sheep. It is a follower. Alpha frequency is the most easily manipulated, the most impressionable energies. And so, again, Mars, Pluto, Venus. Mars, Pluto, Venus, and the identity crisis that comes with that in the ways in which we posture rather than the ways in which we move gracefully. Thank you. Six of Spades, Nine of Spades speaks very much, especially in this order, to not necessarily collectively understanding what we want to create, but understanding so much of a literal quality, being very protective or defensive of who we've been and whether or not that's valuable anymore. The ways in which we can protect these prior sensibilities to our own detriment and get so deeply calcified in that, not even rooted, but deeply calcified in that new information is itself a threat. That new ideas become themselves a threat. But we don't even know what are we protecting? What are we protecting in that kind of ideology, in that kind of understanding? Are we protecting the status quo? Because that's not what needs our protection. That's what needs to be eradicated. That's what needs to be uprooted and unearthed. And that is that difficult truth that this moon will bring. The Nine of Spades that follows it is, I think, the projection of fear that many have about what is possible and about what it is they're capable of and about what it is that they are even willing to do in these times. Are you willing to take on even a little bit of discomfort if it means that you will be better off for it? If it means that not even just you, but the life that you lead and the ways in which it influences people will be able to bring about something altogether more new, more rewarding, more fulfilling than that which we've known. And again, this moon being about, transformation and transmutation. The ways in which we've seen ourselves before is an illusion. Are we afraid of stripping that back to see ourselves in truth, in raw truth? Ultimately, this is all in the idea of demons' wants. Angels are the self-righteous, destructive types. Demons are very much meant to teach, meant to love, meant to connect. And the only demon or negative energy that harasses you is yourself. Again, running away from the storm. We feel chased by it, when in actuality, that is just its path. I've had visions of this where I guess I can just tell the story, huh? Where in my dream, before I went to this native burial ground, I had a dream, and it was like I was driving in this area, and there was somebody in the passenger seat, and I'm driving down this very dark road, this very dark dirt road, but I could see clearly in my rear view mirror that there's this sort of dark entity, like, hurling at me. And in fear, I floored it, drove faster. And I could feel the panic, and I could feel the panic of the person in the passenger seat. And drove faster and faster, and I could see the gate, the threshold of, exiting this boundary, I suppose, wherever it was that we were. And as I went faster, this thing in my rear view mirror just barreled on closer and closer, just frothing, it seemed, and moving faster than I could. And I looked at the passenger, and they had fear in their eyes beyond belief. Panic, even. And when I saw that, I knew I had to stop. I knew that I had to just slam on the brakes. And so I slammed on the brakes, and I looked back into the mirror, and this thing stopped, and stopped chasing, and stopped barreling. It almost stepped back, even, like it was waiting for me to now meet it. It was never chasing me. It just had a story to tell, and it was wondering if I was willing to listen. And because I stopped, it was a sign that I was willing to hear it, that I was willing to hear its story, that I was willing to listen to it. Much like even children will pull at our pant legs and want to show us something, or what have you, want to tell us something, want to ask us a question. And too often do we stop, I'm busy, I'm working, and da 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 da, and sort of shoo them away as if what they have to say isn't valuable, when in fact it's some of the most valuable things you'll ever hear, because their minds have not been indoctrinated just yet, because their minds have not been calcified with fear or jealousy or envy and lack just yet. And that is, in fact, one of the ways in which we silence our children, in which ways we deem our children less than, in which ways we deem them not worth listening to. And that in and of itself is exactly the fertile circumstances for the ways in which we see such terrible exploitation today. And it may seem irrelevant, but it is not. It is how the system that we found ourselves in thrives. And so even in that small example, facing your fears, facing your demons, facing these emotions that you suppress, listening to the children and their stories, is effectively creating a different circumstance where where the terrible things that we see today couldn't have been possible, wouldn't have been possible if we weren't so inundated into that level of dismissiveness. And ultimately, I would say disrespect of energy, disrespect of wisdom. This Nine of Swords is heavy, and it's intense, but is it also all just in the mind? We love to overthink things. We love to overthink things. We love to overcomplicate things so as to feel more smart, more honorable, more valiant, more self righteous. When in fact, the great power that the mind has to compress and to transport you into the very thing that you sought to avoid is equal and opposite of power to allow the mind to paint a picture entirely anew, to transport you to somewhere where these things can breathe in better alignment, where this King of Hearts can be upright and in integrity and in alignment and in great sharing and in great growth and in expansive awareness. Even this like beautiful green just reminds me of something my best friend always says, or that taught me, and that I always say, is that love is a growing thing. Love is an expansive frequency. And, even roses and rose magic is a powerful frequency, is a powerful energy to use in casting and conjure. Even in the ways in which indigenous calendar systems acknowledge Venus much more so than Western astrology does, is because it's an expansive frequency. Whereas Western astrology wants to trap you in the mind, trap you in insanity, trap you in its secrecy, much like all of the systems that we're trying to shuck off. The Five of Clubs at the bottom of the deck is very much these boundaries that we give ourselves. Is very much the distance of illumination that is capable when we give ourselves certain boundaries. If you only think that one step forward, one step back, one step to the side is your possibility, then you'll never know what it's like to pirouette or to spin or to dance more expressively. But this five isn't just that. If we're able to place those boundaries in ways that are more aware of what it is that we want to be, aware of our own in personal boundaries, our own interpersonal boundaries, and rather than walls, our own placement of boundaries with others. It's like creating the metrics of space that you wish to move in. It's like illuminating the path in so many ways, rather than it being like a prison cell. These fives in general are like, 5 points in the pentagram. It is your circle, and it is also every physical mode of conjuration that feeds spirit into it. There's something at each point of the pentagram. There's an element at each point of the pentagram that are all in balance, that are all equally realized, that all feed this integral energy. This five doesn't have to be a prison. It can very much be the ways in which, again, like I said, especially with these spades and with this fire, the ways in which we create with the mind. If the mind is only able to create within boundaries of anxiety and fear and guilt and shame, then we've got some decolonizing and some banishing of the patriarchy to do. Then we have some unlearning of religious dogma to do, because at the end of the day, organized religion is just a psyop and a social experiment and is a mode of control. How do we guilt and shame ourselves back into a corner rather than seek expansion and possibility? The mind is a very powerful thing, and 100% it can lead you to a loop of your own hell of a prison, or it can expand into creations of your own heaven. Heaven and hell are just in the mind. Angels and demons in original text, pre-Christian nationalist translation, were a similar energy. It wasn't until they had a designated, directed path that they became one or the other. And angels are very much calcification of ego to be self-righteous against all costs. Again, with that Machiavellian sort of tendency toward manipulation for the self rather than for the whole. And demons are a resonance. Demons are a reflection of you. With this 5, it can go either way. You know, what do you bring into the circle? How can you expect a particular kind of product or, you know, a particular kind of release of that energy when all you brought was shame and guilt and doubt and fear and self-loathing and what have you? Instead, why can't we bring the best parts of ourselves, and not just the best parts of ourselves? Why can't we face those parts of ourselves and peel that back? So see that, you know, it's not that I'm this or that, or that I have anything to be particularly ashamed of, because I'm growing, because, you know, being a good person is an everyday choice, because honoring myself and, you know, not talking down to myself is an everyday choice and is becoming a new pattern, rather than maintaining the patterns of what people built me up to be or what people told me I was, and my, you know, protecting that at all costs, because that's the only thing that I knew. It's very much how we justify shitty family members too. How we justify like fucking racist grandparents and this and this and that. It's like, oh, that's just how they are. That's just how my family is. Like, no, it doesn't have to be. Your circle can be full of something very different, but you can't be mad that your circle has that shit still in it when all you've done is give it permission. And obviously, I say you as in the collective, not in a particularly directive way. But if it triggers you, shit, that's a you thing. And I think this 5 of clubs also very much is saying that it's not just you. It's not just about you. And if you take things personally, stop making it just about you. This 5 of clubs is also the ways in which we can light a new path, the ways in which we can clear a new path, the ways in which we can illuminate a new understanding or a new path and create fertile circumstances for it. The ways in which we hold space for growth, you know, hold up structure so that we have integral flow, rather than like, is that about me? It's all me, 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 me. That's not conducive to any kind of growth, nor is that helpful. And if you find yourself around people like that, well, send them this video. Or perhaps in a very gentle way. Be like, hey, it's not about you. It is about all of us. And we have to be able to hold space for that. And again, that weight-bearing point in this triangulation of Jupiter and Mercury is that, you know, big idea and the bridge of communication toward it, the bridge of, you know, rhyme and reason toward it. It wants to be balanced, but the way that the Earth is sitting now is absorbing all of that energy and asking us to balance it with it. It's very much, you know, again, that are we justifying means to an end, or are we able to utilize the means and the end to a more aligned state rather than, you know, justify away? Maybe this is also the ways in which too often do we play with rhyme and reason to justify or separate, the art from the artist, or the product from the person. When in fact, maybe we don't have to separate it at all. Maybe it's meant that way. Maybe there is no separation. And for that, we don't have to, justify with logic and reason why these things are okay. Maybe, what is it? Wasn't Lewis Carroll fucking pedophile too? But hey, everybody loves Alice in Wonderland. Or like Neil Gaiman and his fucking accusations. But hey, everybody loves the stories he writes. And maybe it's not a matter of separating the art from the artist so that you can still enjoy it. Maybe both of those things, we're very much in alignment. And somebody that writes such good stories is because they are a manipulator. Because they manipulate reality. Because they manipulate truth. Maybe Alice in Wonderland was a sign of that person's own insanity and unrest and confusion within the self as well. Maybe we've justified certain things that we're doing because we feel like we have to, but really what Spirit wants us to recognize is maybe it's not in alignment anymore. Maybe it's not so practical anymore. Maybe it's not the kind of fulfillment that you ultimately want. And this is the only total lunar eclipse. So I do feel like we're walking through a door into a new room that we kind of got to stick around in for a while. So make sure that it's the kind of room you want to be in. There is like a partial eclipse in August that I think will all add to this, that I think will very much add to this, rather than maybe be another transitional point. That will, reveal more or add more color to the picture, I suppose, add more definition to the picture. In which case, like if life was a coloring book, make sure that you're picking a page that you really actually want to color. And even in that, when we were kids, just because it was a dog or a tree or whatever, doesn't mean that we were beholden to only using those colors that it's supposed to be, like a fire hydrant. They're not even red everywhere. So whose rules are we following? And how is it that we want to color our life by our own embrace? All right. We pull spirits to bridge the gap and pull some expansive colors as a bridge of communication to these romantic energies. As things rev up, because even these numbers like sound like revving an engine, sound like a lot of, I don't know what the musical term is, but like a lot of like ringing notes faster and faster until they find resolve and stillness. So in order to understand that momentum, to utilize that momentum or mitigate that momentum, we're going to have to ground into resolve so that we can find stillness and a place for it to actually set, rather than just be like over and over again. Like, how fucking like alarms go off, really. It's just this like back and forth ringing in my ears. shift, transition. Beautiful. I love that. That's where we want to be. Perfect. All right, my friends. Round 2. Much like we are hanging out, and there are cards in between us, I invite you to take some breaths with me. You do not have to channel the moon, but do yourself a favor. Open yourself to a full breath, and open your awareness to any sensations that might arise. Take a deep breath in. And exhale. Take a deep breath in. And exhale. Take a deep breath in. And exhale. Ooh, okay, interesting. The light is very much less burning, but it is trailing. It's kind of like, the ways in which we see the Milky Way even. It's like this river of stars. And so maybe that's the ways in which we're able to ride frequency, move with frequency, the ways in which we're able to find flow in everything, rather than be, so drawn to the flame. And maybe even the ways in which we're able to imagine a new galaxy, like see something beyond the galaxy. Like if we're at the edge of the Milky Way, then that's almost like being at the end of the earth and being able to see that there is something else on the other side, that there's more out there, because there is light in the distance. Like there is light outside of that. It's just kind of, I'm seeing this trail beforehand. And the ways in which vibration came through is to not even be more direct. Like I feel like so much of us are like very direct, like index finger, point, you, blame, shame game, yada yada yada. Which like I do my best not to play, in general. I try to take every opportunity to utilize a learning experience, a growing experience. Because, old adage, pointing fingers at one person and there's 3 pointing back at you. And oftentimes we avoid that because we're so ingrained into this, like, Christian nationalist, puritanical ethic of blame and shame and guilt and lack of introspection and lack of, self-reflection, lack of internalization, even. In so many ways, that's even in the spiritual community. Everybody likes to fucking think they're better than. That's why we have, this spirituality or occultism to white supremacy pipeline. That's why we have the Aleister Crowley occult to incel pipeline. Because most people would rather do literally anything but take a fucking look in the mirror. And it doesn't have to be some big showy action. You don't have to, publicize it. You don't have to, like, make these big moves or big decisions. You just have to be willing to look yourself in the mirror, honestly, truthfully. And build a relationship of honesty with yourself so that you don't feel the need to posture, so that you don't feel the need to justify whether or not you're a good person or perform one way or the other. And that goes across so many boards. That goes across absolutely so many boards. The ways in which even, gender identity flourish. It doesn't have to be acknowledged by other people's metrics. In fact, very much the opposite is true. This understanding of binary gender really has nothing positive to say about actualizing or serves as any kind of positive metric or positive example of actualizing what those energies actually mean. So let us not get duped into masquerading as the binary when we can be so much more expansive than that. How appropriate. How appropriate. 10 of Pentacles, top of the deck, which in so many ways is the ways in which we braid balance, the ways in which we weave cords of truth and reality. You know, again, if Virgo is the logos and Leo is the pathos, you know, Virgo's the logic and the analytic, and Leo is the passionate fire, da 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 da, then what are the ethics that bind these two? What are the ethics that bind these two things as true, or that allow them to expand or embrace or identify more clearly and be woven throughout? If you've ever read something with an author that doesn't have coherence in these characters, the character is often very unlikable because there's a level of hypocrisy or of like disunite. Catcher in the Rye is a really great example of this because it's used very distinctively and very deliberately to illustrate hypocrisy within the main character or to illustrate judgment in the main character despite what it is that they actually show themselves to be in the text. And I remember that being like absolutely fucking hard to read and being like, I fucking can't stand this character. And by the time I finished the book, I remember thinking, wow, this is a fantastic book. And the meaning of that is to illustrate our own fear of ourselves. The reason that so many didn't like the book or didn't like the main character is because you're meant to see yourself in that character. And when you see hypocrisy, you reject it. You know, or when you see, this disunite and what is said and what is done, then we reject the character and refuse to really analyze, like, why is it that I'm rejecting this so much? And 100% that's what I did, was like, damn, I don't like this character because I don't want to be like this character. And I worry that I can't be. And it became this, like, very deep internalized exercise of, like, oh, I have to not just speak but actualize. I have to, unify what it is that I think and what it is that I do, instead of just pontificating judgment, instead of just projecting, instead of just, spiraling internally about it. It's been a while since I've read that book, but that was one thing that always stuck with me, is like, modes of hypocrisy make for a regular Holden Caulfield. And, even in that, just the name itself, the I don't remember what it's called, but like a baby born in a caul or something like that, is like where the name, like part of the word of Homeboy's name, and it's a layer of skin, or like a layer of added skin that covers this baby and clouds the eyesight, as a protective layer that takes much longer to fall off. So in what ways are we protecting ourselves and ultimately prolonging and procrastinating growth? In modes that we protect ourselves, oftentimes it is, if not always, it is a mode of prolonging and procrastinating that which we deem uncomfortable, even though it may be more fulfilling or more growing. And that's not to say that we should never do that. It's kind of a maybe natural inclination. I don't know how natural, but it's something that we kind of maybe do habitually, right? And that's not to say that makes you automatically like a fuck ass, but that is to say it's an opportunity for you to step back and be like, oh, okay, what am I running from? What am I procrastinating? What am I postponing? What am I afraid of doing? And why? And oftentimes it's the thing that needs your attention the most and will be the most rewarding, illuminating, and fulfilling. Speaking of, Three of Pentacles, bottom of the deck, which is very earthbound, but is also very much, I think, the skills that we're able to collaborate. With this three, it is coherence in so many ways. It's our capacity to hold charge, be it positive or negative. It's like I said, the logos, the pathos, and the ethos that ties them together. It's the mind, the body, and the spirit in alignment. And when that is in alignment, we have a very expansive creation. We have a very relatable creation. We have something that's able to hold up a mirror and also reflect light, much like the moon. Yes? This Three of Pentacles is very interesting because it's also very detailed, right? One boy is like carving into something or other. He's wearing his heart on his chest. What is this emblem? An orb as a necklace? I am not sure. But an orb of spirit, a central point of spirit, maybe even because of where it's placed. The secret chakra, the secret point in the Tree of Life. But the secret chakra of Hit, or Shekinah in the Tree of Life, or the rooting, churning element of heart energies. And there's one in the third as well. And then there's three in the mouth. So it is much more than 7 chakras, which I know I probably sound like a broken record because I say that all the time. There's bridging of gaps. There's weaving of things together. There's an incredible amount of detail in wood grain, right? And that is the details of frequency. The many strings that we can weave on the web. Should we know what it is that we want to take and what it is that we do not, which kind of brings me back to here as well. What do we really want to bring into the circle? What do we want out from it? What are we bringing to the circle that may not be actually conducive to the circle in general? Even in the ways you can braid your hair. What is the intention that you have? Do you bring care and concern and gentility to the braiding of your hair, to the weaving of any truth? Or do you bring, force and control, the many other unpleasant feelings? And that's something for sure that I can personally relate to too, because sometimes, for sure, I just need to sit with my emotions and my impulses and my frustrations so that I don't yank on the knots in my hair and I'm actually able to coax them out. And so that I can braid my hair with love in mind, with balance in mind, rather than in a rush and find it's like uneven and it's bulky and it's, not the kind of thing that I wanted to create, essentially. And creation is a key point of this. He has tools of creation. He has very much ways in which he wants to direct his energy and ways in which he wants to reinforce his energy. The excavation is also a tool, but it's a tool that has its own place and its own time. Much like, you can't write and edit at the same time. It becomes very overwhelming. Or, the ways in which, underpaintings precede a process. Or even with content creation, the ways in which filming and editing ought to take their separate, ought to be given their separate attentions so that the whole task doesn't become overwhelming, like all of these infinite lines, right? And we're able to bridge in these 3 points our inspiration, our intention, and the actual product. And this is actually very funny because it makes me think of something that I worked on a long time ago where I explored the idea of a sellout and what that means in the music industry, I suppose, and what I deem even good music, really. And what has maintained throughout time is that if you do not have a creative process or a creative product, then I can't really respect your creation. If you have a creative process or a creative product, then I'm interested. Then I'll give it the time of day. Then I'm interested. Party on. Let's do it. Let's do whatever it is. Let's see where we go with this one. Because there's so much mindless creation. There's so much irresponsible creation. That's for sure in very literal states with the music industry. But a lot of times, I think that's also the ways in which we create our own lives, where we're just kind of like waiting and following suit and following along and staying subservient and silent or whatever, and then wondering why we don't feel ourselves. It's because you've never been yourself. There was no creative process. There was no creative project or creative intention or creative process or in the projection of. And so the product is itself, not you. But the misdirect of that frustration and of that anger is often directed outside rather than like, oh shit, maybe I should get these things in line and create something with my own intention and with my own inspiration so that I can feel like it's actually a part of me. And then you also feel like there's so much part of you that it's hard to let go of, for sure. Anytime I've sold a painting, I'm like, oh, it feels like I chopped off my finger, like my foot or something. And I'm like, here you go, thank you. Which, thankfully it finds its home. It's somebody that appreciates it, that doesn't just treat it like a severed limb. And that goes for many things. That goes for very many things. So that we can find alignment and even in the reflection of these lights, it illustrates a whole. It reflects a whole. We may only have edges. We may only have glimpses of illumination. But the more faith we have in that and trust the process of any creation, then the more we are able to really see the totality of what it is that we've done, of what it is that we've created, and of how it speaks for itself. This is how we give life to things. This is how we give or breathe spirit into gifts, into anything we output into the world. And so back to the Six of Spades, what is it we're defending, protecting, or projecting in any of those terms? Are we defending the status quo? Are we defending our own complacency and comfort? Are we, fearful of changes in that? Are we projecting that fear? Or are we able to project a frequency that's in alignment and that is much more true to heart energy? Oh me, oh my. I can't help but think that it also kind of reminds me of this whole Shia LaBeouf fucking thing. Fuck that guy. The ways in which he's excused his fear of maybe something that's happened to him, maybe preconceived notions, maybe it's trauma. It's very possible. Absolutely. But protecting these misnomers, these false comforts, and projecting that fear in violence is the problem. Homeboy needs to get some therapy and really strip back what it is he's afraid of, because it's not his fear of queer people, it's not his fear of gay people, it's his fear of maybe being taken advantage of, because he has been. It's his fear of, assertion of dominance, because people in power conflate control and control and exploitation with sexuality, and it's not. Very much in the ways that there's minor attracted persons that even the, what is it, ACLU, the American Civil Liberties Union, has defended in court as a sexuality, when it is not. It is not. It is a power sickness. It is a power sickness. It is not a sexuality to want to control or hurt or break something simply because it is smaller than you, simply because it is smaller or seemingly weaker than you. And homophobia is not a fear of gay people, it is a psychosis. It is a psychosis and a misdirection of fear because we've conflated so much abuse with sexuality. I read somewhere that men just fear that they'll be treated the way that they treat women. And that's absolutely a huge part of it. And I think even the machismo, or the ways in which, cis males will excuse behavior like that, is because they also refuse to admit to themselves that they're also afraid of the very same system. They are also afraid of men themselves, but they can't admit that because that would make them weak in the eyes of patriarchy, and so they bend over for it. It's not cool. It's not cool, and I don't fucks with it. And so we strip back these misnomers and define key terms. And when we understand it, perhaps more in that way, clearly, then we won't have this kind of violence. We won't have this kind of conflation and perversion and misunderstanding and simulatory thought, really. Before technology became so prominent, the simulation or a simulation was defined as an inversion of information, not as, an AI thing. And that's very much what's happened because of religion, because of colonization, because of capitalism, because of idolatry and fame, and all of these weird fucking things. There's an inversion of information, and so we must peel it back and flip it on its head. And that sounds real uncomfortable, but being upside down is really nice and purifies the blood. And what better way and what better time than on a blood moon? Wow. Wow, wow, wow. Wow, wow, wow. Okay. Okay, my friends. To integrate, and to actualize. Let's do some breaths together. In which case, if you are new here, it is a cycle of harmonies, breathing. If you've noticed, then also a cycle of harmonies, astrological charting, in which I go through all signs. So we go through all elements. We cleanse the elements, and we create a path for better use of these elements and a better understanding of these elements. In which case, it is not earth, air, fire, water. As much as I love the craft, that is a backmasking of efficient ways to conjure. It is fire, earth, air, water. We do each element with breath 3 times, and that gives us 12. The 13th is an utteration, an intonation, or simply an aum. So as to, much like an ultrasonic, we shake off the bullshit and we cleanse the energy, we cleanse the pathway. Maybe that's a sigh, maybe that's a groan, maybe that's an aum because you're feeling particularly inflamed. If you have not read Qualities of Power, Powers of Quality, I do go over various different scientific journals about the benefits of aum meditation or of any of these breath works in their own right, as well as any magical implications of. So perhaps that's something that's your style. But with that being said, a fire breath is in through your mouth and out through your nose, which, if you notice that direction, having to focus, that exhale very much ignites the nerves behind your eyes in creation and capacity, and requires your focus to be directed. How appropriate. We do that 3 times, in through the mouth, out through the nose. I'm just going over it, and then we're going to do it all together. So no need to feel like you've got to keep up with this explanation. We do that 3 times. Then we move to an air or an earth breath, in which case we direct it in through the nose and out through the nose, which grounds the fire that we built into the body. So it is not an energy that is thrusting against us or that is combative inside of us. We do that 3 times. We move to an air breath, which is in through the mouth, out through the mouth. Particularly with the tongue out, because you'll notice that draws up the diaphragm, and so we're toning the root chakra, we're toning the pelvic floor, we're activating iliacus and inguinal muscles, and we're also bringing root chakra energies to rise and meet with our more solar plexus or more mental capacity energies, so that they can collaborate rather than us be all spirit, no grounding, or all grounding, no capacity for spirit. Following that 3 times, we bring the breath in through the nose and out through the mouth. Slowly, patiently, like a gentle stream, if you will, because it is a water breath. In which case, the air breath clears the mind. The water breath allows us to, much like a river delta, to clear a path before us, to clear out any debris, to allow for more flow and irrigation of these energies. It is a breath work that I worked with, designed, conjured, so that it can be utilized to clear energy in such a way that it'll be able to give you the space and the focus to, if you want to take this and go to bed, party on. You're calling it a night? Dope. You'll be able to sleep better. If you've got to pull an all-nighter or you want to stay up all night reading until you see the moon, then party on. It'll help you get centered in that as well. So it is about cleansing that energy for us to be able to bring to it what we want and be able to clear a path for what we want to see. So if you will join me, let's have at it, yeah? Take a deep breath in through the mouth. Sipping air in, feeling your chest and shoulders expand with it, and direct that exhale through the nose. Feeling heat rise behind the eyes, perhaps. Sipping breath in through the mouth. Feeling the space behind the throat and the jaw even more spacious, and exhaling through the nose. Feeling that direction down the bridge of the nose. Inhaling through the mouth. Perhaps feeling the space between your shoulder blades even open up to this heat. And exhaling through the nose. Noticing the focus that is required of you to direct your breath. Inhaling through the nose. Feeling the body soften and expand. And exhaling through the nose. Feeling that energy also descend into the belly, into the hips, into the thighs, making you more real. Inhaling through the nose. Feeling the central channel in the body open to breath, and exhaling through the nose. Feeling the breath ground into the body like weight, like actuality. Inhaling through the nose. And exhaling through the nose. Feeling that heat that we rose in the last breath expand more thoroughly in the body. Sipping air in through the mouth. Feeling the coolness of air touch the back of your skull, the back of your throat, the space behind your heart, and drawing the tongue out, exhaling. Feeling the way that diaphragm and root comes to rise, comes to meet in the middle and bridge the gaps. Inhaling through the mouth. Sweeping air through the body and the mind. And exhaling, bringing root sensibilities to help clear a hectic mind. Inhaling through the mouth. And exhaling through the mouth. Perhaps feeling that much more spaciousness, that much more clearing in every limb and open space. Now directing an inhale through the nose, sweeping warm air, calm air in and around the skull, and gently, patiently exhaling through the mouth like a gentle stream with a clear direction. Inhaling through the nose, feeling the throat and skull and mind open, and exhaling through the mouth, feeling tension wash away with it. Inhaling through the nose, and perhaps the longest exhale you can find, gently, patiently through the lips. And when you have expelled every last drop of that watery breath, we inhale through the nose, and we'll release any sound, intonation, utteration, or perhaps simply an aum with it. Perhaps you can see the color or shape of your breath and your sound in your mind's eye. That is a very true part of you. These are the levels of truth that this moon will help us to see, restore, and take on as our identities, more so than indoctrination that we've all been subject to. And with that, I leave you with this gift of breath, of integration, so that you may actualize with it. I've given you 2 steps in this trio. What will you make of the third? And with that I say, many blessings to you. Thank you from my heart. I appreciate you. And hopefully I'll be able to see you and breathe with you and conjure with you sometime soon. Sooner than you think. Until next time. Tanata,